Howdy, I'm Jammer. So, just to begin, as always, please don't forget that I have actually started a Patreon to help with this channel as well as my art. There's a link tree in the description section below. It'll take you to my blog, my artist page, my Instagram, and most importantly, the Patreon, where for $1 a month you can help this channel. So, if you've got $1 a month that you don't mind losing, throw it my way. Please, 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 please. Okay. So, as of this taping, it is May 20th, and chances are this video is premiering sometime in December, so you can see how far in advance I tend to make these things out. But right now, it's about May 21st. No, I think it's the 22nd. Either way, it's May, and for whatever reason, I decided to pick up Signal to Noise by Neil Gaiman and Dave McKean. Now, longtime viewers, or just new viewers to the channel who may have just looked through my page and seen some of the videos, know I actually reviewed this book a while back. It's a weird video because I'm wearing a big floppy hat that I'm fond of wearing sometimes. But nonetheless, Signal to Noise is a great book, and I wanted to reread it and hopefully do another video here for this channel because I love this book so much. But of course, misdirection as always, today is not about Signal to Noise. Today is about Dave McKean, specifically this collection of stories that he published titled Pictures That Tick. Now, Pictures That Tick is actually one of two volumes. The second one you can see right here. Oh, we're going to be joined as ever and always by Tommy. Tommy, say hello to the internet. Okay. He's going to join us for the time being. But Pictures That Tick was a collection by Dave McKean that is, the phrase passion project may not be the right words for it. But when we talk about Dave McKean, he's really known more than anything else, or at least by a fair number of comics readers, as the man who did all of the covers for the Sandman series. And seriously, if you've never looked at the Sandman series before, if nothing else, take the time and effort to find a copy of this book, Dust Covers, because it's literally all the covers Dave McKean did for the series, and they are stunning. Truly beautiful. Dave McKean is a brilliant artist, and every book he's ever done, every work he's ever done just really informs that. But some of the things, sometimes something like that, or sometimes in the comics industry, there are artists who will contribute nothing but covers. Like, that's literally some people all that they do, and they get a reputation for doing that. And some people make good money, and they're happy doing that. But Dave McKean is an artist in the traditional sense of the term, and Pictures That Tick was a kind of opportunity to sort of break free of just doing covers in and of itself and tell stories. Now, Dave McKean has done a number of art projects and a number of comics in the course of his life, but Pictures That Tick was probably one of the first real instances that we saw of it. And looking at this book, it's important to recognize, too, this is not a collection of bound trades. This is not going to be something like Pictures That Tick #1, Pictures That Tick #2. This is, in a truest sense, pretty much a collection of short stories done by Dave McKean in comic form. And like Dave McKean's artwork overall, these stories are stunningly beautiful in their execution. But they're also really weird because it's Dave McKean. So, in this video, I'm going to attempt to do just 3 stories, because it's not interconnected by any means. These are just wandering random stories that McKean produced, and so I'm going to try to tackle just about 3 of them and sort of look at, one, what exactly is he trying to do in these stories narratively, but then also, 2, how is his McKeanness, that's the only word I really have for it, contributing to a unique comics experience, or how is it really playing with the medium? Well, let's get into it, and let's talk about Dave McKean, as if we haven't already. Okay, so before you ask, Tommy left, so I have a little bit more ability to move around. So, when we talk about Pictures That Tick, one of the nice things about this book is, like I said, it's a collection of just random stories that Dave McKean has sort of produced over the course of his career and managed to compile here into this really impressive collection. It's also a pretty big book. Like, if you put it next to, say, this book by Orchid, you can kind of see this is probably what's known as a kind of prestige edition, even though it's paperback. But this is a big book. But one of the early stories in the book is Ash, and one of the cool things about each of the each of these stories is Dave McKean provides something of a little introduction to the book. Now, when I say little introduction, this is not a sort of typical introduction. You'll see these are at the most just a small handful of sentences. Oftentimes, it's not even really about the story itself. He doesn't ever offer anything in the way of like a clear explanation of this is what I was thinking about, or this is what I was feeling, or something like this had happened in my life. In fact, more often than not, it's poetry. This first story that I'm going to focus on, the title is Ash, and his introduction literally reads, originally written as a horror story, central image of branch growing through girl, thought by editor to be too horrific. I guess I agree, but the image is right. I tried to dull it down, but it touches all the sensitive nerves, the rawness of emotion at that age, so I guess it's all right. Thinks, ellipses. If you listen to that, you get an image, but after that, it's really up to the reader's imagination to sort of begin to approach the story. And honestly and truthfully, I kind of like that because it provides me, the reader, far more opportunity to dream. And if you've seen any of my videos about Dave McKean, particularly the book or the videos that I did about Black Dog, The Dreams of Paul Nash, dreams are really crucial to the aesthetic of Dave McKean, to his overall body of work, to just his approach to art, period. And so as we look at the story of Ash, we get that. Now, right off the bat, one of the things I really also like about Pictures That Tick is their formal elements. Oftentimes, these stories are collections of photographs. Sometimes they're pen and ink drawings and illustrations. In the case of Ash, you're going to get a multimedia story. Now, what does that mean? You're going to get things that are photographs, things that are paintings, things that are stories, things that are computer graphicing images, what have you. Now, as he noted, the story of Ash is basically the story of a young woman who finds her life kind of stolen away from her. If you read the first opening pages, and I'm going to do a little bit of reading, but then talk about the story itself, you hear Ash. There once only was a little girl called Ash, and Ash fell asleep one night, and one night only, and in the morning awoke and lived. The end. That's page 1 of the story. But, of course, that's not really the end, because, of course, we turn the page, and then we get this beautiful 2-page spread, but we get this page here, and we see, as we sort of slowly move in on this house, a house that, honestly, it looks like something out of a dream, because we can't figure out specifically where it is. We get the notion that this is maybe a house surrounded by trees, in a plain, maybe next to a city, what have you. But again, there's a kind of interesting observation of the world because he doesn't couch it or he doesn't level it in anything that we would really recognize over time. And that's going to play an important effect, narratively speaking, on the rest of the story. Now, I'll read another page here. I promise this video is not going to be just me reading, but it's important to get the kind of tone that he's trying to go for here. After, of course, the end, the narrator goes, "What? You want more than that? Like what? You want to know something about her? Well, okay." Ash lived in the woods in a house in the woods, mostly in her bedroom in a house in the woods with her father and her stepmother. Ah, yes, well, here's where the story really starts, perhaps. Her father, who she loved, and her mother, her proper mother, who she also loved, fell apart, and little Ash, who was very little and who had only just realized that she had an opinion and a say over her life, after all, was suddenly faced with an even bigger and darker realization that she didn't. That life, some other life, a life of separation and tears and stepmothers and strangers and strange stepmothers, had swept her off her feet and was busy carrying her along with no sign of ever letting her go. And this made little Ash very sad and angry and spiteful and full of fear. And so little Ash fell asleep one night, and one night only, and in the morning awoke and lived. The end. Spoiler alert, it's not really the end. That opening, narratively, sets us up for a really, really interesting story about a little girl who loses her mother, or sort of the implication is that something has happened domestically in her family. Her mom and dad have gotten a divorce. We don't know the details of that, and we don't really need to know the details of that because it's not about their marriage. It's really more about what the breakup of that marriage does to Ash. And something about that is really interesting because even though I grew up in a home with parents that stay together, in fact, my parents are still together. I think they're coming up on about 32 years. No, excuse me, 33 years come August. So my family, my domestic situation is not like Ash's, but I grew up watching a lot of movies, as you do growing up, and I've kind of observed more and more there was lots of instances of divorce in those movies and the way it impacted the children. And Dave McKean does a really interesting thing here in that, like he notes, he creates this image of a little girl with a tree coming out of her and carrying her away. Now, you'll see here, in terms of the story itself, he doesn't convey anything through word bubbles like we're used to seeing in comics. He instead has this narrator sort of delivering lines, usually in the corner or at the top of a panel, and poor little Ash is sort of carried on through her life. Even as she grows up into adult, she still sort of feels as if this other force is growing through her, determining the direction of her life, the tone and tenor of her life. And by the end of the story, she really comes to recognize what has happened to her and the way she has approached life. It ultimately ends with her being an older woman and recognizing that all of her life was effectively somebody else's dream. And that's really interesting because one of the things that can happen in the wake of a divorce is people can feel lost. I can only speak for myself, but after my own divorce, I felt really lost. It's something that happens to you. Now, thankfully, I'm getting to a point now where I'm really kind of settled into my own affairs. I've settled into my own self. I'm getting comfortable with me again. But even so, there's still the perception of sort of drifting along, or really feeling at times like there's something growing up and out of me and pushing me in a particular direction rather than assuming that responsibility myself. If we look at then formally what McKean is doing in the story, you'll note he balances between this kind of three-dimensional representation of drawing, and then on occasion will bump back into 2D ink drawing. Now, this has a nice effect sometimes of breaking up the tone that's taking place in each one of these panels. But again, you'll note the way that he represents the human figure and the human form, the way he focuses on individual parts of the body in each one of these panels, and the way he sort of maintains a sort of very typical and repetitive color palette is important. Because if we look at the very beginning of Ash, we had this interesting figure of this little girl. Now again, it's very sort of abstracted. He's really playing with the human body as he does with just about all of his artwork. But you have this nice red dress and these sheets and these splash of red around her eye. But then as the story goes on, we sort of pull away from that. And we have less and less green, less and less red. And the story becomes instead just this kind of dark brownish yellow. And it feels like it's kind of sapping away at Ash. In fact, to the point that when we get to this page, there's almost nothing of her herself. She's nothing more than a few lines on the page. Visually speaking, Ash is a great story because it uses the medium, or it uses a lot of great visual cues and efforts to really sap away Ash's feeling of agency, of herself. And so even if you aren't looking at the panel arrangement, which I'll talk about now, but even if you aren't looking at the panel arrangement, just looking at the way he represents Ash's body in the story is really wonderful at about exploring the emotional effect of Ash's life. She's living a life that is not her own. Instead, there is another force pushing her along, pulling her along, and she feels powerless. Now again, if you look at the panel layouts, you'll see, obviously, McKean knows how to use it. And more importantly, he's got a lot of breathing room. He gives himself a lot of breathing room. There's some pages here you'll see there's maybe 3 panels at the most. But by taking that time and space, he's able to really more accomplish his vision and really show the effect of Ash's body being sort of torn and ripped apart by this tree. Cueing then into the rhetorical effect of Ash's free will and spirit has effectively been gone, and she just lets somebody else or something else move her through her life. I'm at 10 minutes on this story, so I'm going to stop it here, but hopefully you can kind of see just from that story alone, one of the really interesting things about Pictures That Tick is not only is it a really interesting opportunity to explore McKean's aesthetic of using photography and drawing and painting and ink work in order to communicate a story, but you also see that he's able to really stretch in this book and sort of play with panel arrangements to focus on the narrative itself to allow his style to be the force that's driving this narrative home. Now that's one story. I may not be able to do 3 because now I'm hitting 11 minutes and I want to try to keep this around 30 minutes, but that was Ash. Let's move on to another one of the stories in the book, one that I really like, titled His Story. Whew. Okay, so we've talked about Ash. Now let's talk about his story. Now, McKean enters into this. He says, central image noted 10 years ago, story hung around, couldn't find a voice, reading lots of children's books, brevity of language, concentration of events, a life spent trying to look beyond while still paying the bills, acrylic photography and Mac commissioned by Kent Williams for Bento's Story Art Box. Funny name. Again, that doesn't really give you like a big intro. Instead, he gives you a couple of little sentences to kind of pique your interest and draw you in, because reading those sentences, I can sort of imagine this. And then more importantly, I can kind of get the tone of what this dream is. Now, his story looks a lot like Ash. There's going to be a lot of yellows, browns, a kind of faint green that runs throughout. But his story is the story of fatherhood, or really the effect of fatherhood. And I note that I say this as my cute puppy dog, Sonia, comes into the room. Hi, Sonia. So I had to reach over and pet her because she's so cute. Isn't she, Sonia? Anyway, his story is really interesting because, again, it's about fatherhood, or really, much like the story of Ash, it's a story about life and the sort of notion that the story of a father can impact the life of a son. Now, you'll note, right off the bat, again, we don't have anything like word balloons. This is, again, sort of like an internal monologue. And in fact, most of the stories of Pictures That Tick don't really employ word balloons. It's one of the interesting things about this book, is that it's not a kind of familiar structural story. One of the things that Dave McKean, at least in my opinion, is really good at is allowing the images to do a lot more of the narrative drive, and he's also able to allow his figures, who often seem like something stolen straight out of a dream, he allows their body language to do so much of the communicating that's taking place here. So when we look at just this first page, you'll see again, he uses... I forgot to turn off my AC. Be right back. Sorry about that. It worked out anyway, though, because I was able to switch out the comic. Where was I? Oh, yes. His story is really interesting, again, because if you look at even just the first page, you'll note that he kind of sets up a parent-child dynamic with these figures here. At first glance, this can appear kind of disturbing and scary, but again, McKean isn't creating these images to horrify his reader. He just is, again, sort of recrafting the human form to have a dreamlike essence or quality so that we can listen to the story itself and kind of, I don't know how to say this without kind of sounding like a trippy stoner here, but we can just kind of ride the vibe, chill out, and allow this narrative to feel more like a dream than just, an empty story itself. Empty is the wrong word there, my apologies, but this is a dream in the way that this figure's life comes across as a dream. The main character says, when I was very young, my father told me his story. It was hard and sharp and cold and smooth and clear. I couldn't really see it, just the sharp edges, which I tried not to touch. I kept it in a drawer. Now, that's the start of it. And you'll see right off the bat, or you see there in the corner, we see the shard of glass that is effectively his father's story. Now, on the next page here, it props up now to 4 panels. So kind of traditional. There's not that much play with sort of spilling these characters out in this particular story. And honestly, with this particular story, Dave McKean is trying to keep it contained within the panels because that's where most of the action is going to take place. But again, his signature visual style works. And if we keep reading, you'll see when I was still very young, my father died. I had not looked at his story for a few years, so I took it out of the drawer and laid it on my bed. I remembered how clear it was and sharp and smooth. One of the sharp edges cut my hand. I washed the blood away, wrapped his story in a handkerchief, and put it back in the drawer. Now, immediately, hopefully, the reader can kind of tell this story is using a lot of metaphors in order to sort of communicate aspects about parentage, because our parents tell us stories when we're young about when they were children, what their parents were like, what were their parents' responses, what were their own actions when they were a child, and did they learn anything from it. These little short little stories that our parents teach us impact us in ways that we really don't appreciate until we ourselves are adults, and then we know or find out too late, oh shit, yeah, my mother told me to wash my teeth more often and I didn't listen. Should have should have listened to that one. That was one of my mother's stories. I didn't listen to it, and now I pay the price, and it's also one of the reasons why I don't try to show my teeth very much on this channel. Anyway, every viewer here has a story of their parents, whether it be their mother, their father, grandfather, grandmother, whoever raised you. You have that story. You carry it with you. And one of the things we don't really appreciate is the way that our parents' stories aren't just things that we carry with us. At some point, they can also become us. Because as the story progresses, the main figure rediscovers his father's story, and you'll see he jabs himself through the eye with it. Ow. But this isn't just gratuitous violence. His notes right there, and my father. Oh, right. I studied fish and airplanes, I studied weather, and my mother, and my father, and one day I decided to study his story. It was still clear and cold, but I was sure there was more to it than that. I had to get inside it, or let it get inside me. I had to look at it in a different way, hence the stab. The figure basically falls apart, and he says, later I thought I had made a mistake, there was some pain, and the way I saw everything seemed to have changed, but I had taken an important step, I could not go back now. From that point on, the figure sort of observes the way he begins to live his life. He has children, he finds a wife, he marries, and the story remains forever a part of him. But by the end of the book itself, the story has changed, because as you can see, eventually the glass pushes through and kind of comes back out the other side, and he begins to understand the relation his father's story actually had in his life, kind of noting at the very end, I was sure I must still be young because I still had so much life to live, but also I seemed to look back more often than I used to. And when I tried to remember his story, I found that I could not see the rainbow colors anymore. I had forgotten what my father's voice sounded like when he told me his story, or how he moved, or how he laughed. My memories are all seemed frozen and cold and hard. It's kind of a sad ending, and in fact it's a very sad ending, but it's a story about mortality and life and parents, and any story about parents are going to be sad at some point. Steel Magnolias. Never seen it, but I know it's sad. A lot of people told me it's sad. I'm not going to see that movie anytime soon. I want to, but not yet. I'm not ready. Parentage. And the stories our parents tell us. You'll note the very end, it ends with a photograph, which is a dramatic change from the rest of the art style. And that photograph is really important because as we age, details about people that we know and love have altered. When I was about 6 years old, my grandfather had a stroke, and after that stroke, he lost basically his ability to say everything except for the words, yeah, no, and okay. That's it. To this day, I can't remember his voice. I can remember or see dreams in my mind of the way the man talked, and I can kind of hear it ever so vaguely. But realistically speaking, the voice is gone. And so if we really look at the story and the way it pushes back into the head, we get this really wonderful visual metaphor for the way that as we age, the stories that our parents told us really just sort of absorb into us and almost become part of us, to the point that at times we can almost forget that they're there. there's so much of my grandfather that I remember, but also so much of my grandfather that I forget. Case in point, I can't remember what he sounds like. And everybody who's watching probably has their own experience of recognizing, oh crap, did so and so have a beard? Wait, was he tall? What was his name? What did he sound like? I think he had a nasally voice, maybe? Maybe? And that's hard. Because one of the things that happens to us again as we age is that we begin to look back more and more, and unfortunately, we can only process and remember so much. And so, one of the hardest parts about stories is that at first they can appear hard and sharp, but over time they can dull and edge. And so, hopefully, you can see what I'm trying to show you is that Dave McKean does a really wonderful job in this book of using these hard, solid metaphors in order to communicate something really painful and true about the human experience. And again, these sort of dreamlike impressions or representations of humanity also really help. Because at the very beginning of the story, you'll note that the figures seemed to have a little more presence. But in fact, if you actually look at it, we don't get a lot of these human figures. We get the impression of them, we get their shapes, and there's several instances where we can really perceive them as human because of their ability to move about, to perform actions. But if we really look at the way he's employing color, at the way he's employing, at least in my opinion, a really good panel layout right here, again, the reader kind of just moves through this odd dream. It almost doesn't even feel like a story while you're reading it. It feels more just like a confession by some character who's kind of moving through life. And the images sort of further push us away from this. This is iconic, meaning that you can kind of imprint yourself upon it, but then also recognize this as another human being. Nevertheless, the dream-like tone, coupled with McKean's careful use to employ a basic panel layout here, is a really effective way to tell a story or really meditate about the aging process. Let's go ahead and do one more, because as you can tell, I love Dave McKean. I love this book. I want you to like this book and check it out. So let's do one last story, and I promise, I'm going to try to make it quick. All right. The last story in this book that I'm going to do is entitled Bitten and Bruised. He opens it up, a persistent dream lying next to my wife, lifting the covers while she sleeps, afraid of what I might see. Story made for Biblioteca Museum, Lisbon, 5th anniversary, exhibition in 1998. Insane band played at opening, vitriol, wonderfully funny, scary sounds, pickups on the floor, cello samples, tiny mechanical music boxes. These introductions are gold. They really are. Reading this book is like just reading a dream, and oftentimes I'm just pausing to appreciate the layouts on the page, the artistry of McKean, and then sometimes just these little in-between spaces in the book where he's setting up these bizarre, weird, wonderful stories. And the next story is all of those things in one. You'll note this story differs than all the others because this story is entirely drawn out. So we have McKean doing purely pen and ink drawing in this one. And you can kind of see here too, there's a little bit more play with the panel layouts. For the most part, he's going to rely on a lot of just square panels and a lot of like 4 grids. That's pretty much it in this particular story. Therefore, in typical McKean style, you really want to focus on what are the ways that he's distorting the human body and what are the ways that he's using these distortions to enhance reactions. You'll see the story begins with a young man, or at least a middle-aged man, at a cafe looking at a woman in the other booth, and he observes in a moment that she seems to have stumbled upon a scorpion. But then she takes the scorpion out, places it in a box, and then leaves the restaurant, leaving the box behind her. The man walks over, finds the little secret compartment where she's hidden the box, tries to open it up, can't get it unlocked, takes it home. His wife comes in, he hides the box. She does what, all wives everywhere do a little bit of teasing. I'm kidding. She's getting out of her clothes at night. She's had a long day. Stop being a creep. Come on. But you'll note, again, though, too, the simple domestic act of her getting into her clothes The first is kind of drawn out as, okay, the husband's probably being a little bit leering, looking at his wife. It's what husbands do. But then it's an opportunity then to observe, wait a minute, she has a scorpion tattoo on her body. He's curious, so he tries to pull the blanket up and look at the tattoo again. She pulls the blanket down. He's like, okay, fine. Whatever reason, he can't sleep. But then he does sort of sleep, because in the middle of the night, the woman appears to him, pulls out what appears to be a flashlight, shines it through his wife's head, and the light completely shines through. Huh. But when she's shining the light through, the husband begins to see that his wife seems to be dancing, melding with the scorpion, and then he looks down and he looks under the covers and she's become the scorpion. What? Then he looks under again and suddenly it becomes the box. And out of the box we see the man. Wait. What? Suddenly, he's the one at the restaurant, and no, he's the one in the box. He's the one that's been put into the box. And he's going back into the box. What's happening? And here I'm going to stop, because if you want to read it, go to your local comic book shop, get a copy of Pictures That Tick, or go to your local library and see if they've got a copy. That's all I'm going to show you. Yeah. That particular story, what's the full title of it again so I can get it right? Bitten and Bruised. Almost feels like watching a Lynch movie or reading a Lynch movie, because you read comics, you don't watch them, but looking at that again, basic panel layout, every single page, 4 panels, everything's black, white, and gray. But at the same time, he's able to do so much. Again, because there are no dialogue balloons, the reader has to effectively imprint themselves into the story. And whether you realize it or not, you're kind of doing the same thing that I did myself. Moving between these panels, you're like, okay, there's a guy, he's at a table. Oh, look, there's a woman next to him. Wait, she's looking at something. Okay, he's like, I don't know, what's she looking at? And then, whoa, wait, oh, look, it's a scorpion. And she's not afraid. Wait, is she kind of looking at me? Oh, no, I should look away. I'm not looking away. Wait, is she picking up the scorpion? That's all stuff that's happening inside of your brain. And obviously it's not going to happen like that, because you have your own internal monologue. You know how you prefer to read, or how you create meaning and narration in terms of your day-to-day existence. What's happening in these panels, again, the silence really helps build the effect, because you're not hearing dialogue, or you're not hearing dialogue in your head. Because none of these characters talk, you have to narrate it yourself. And that internalized narration only adds to the effect of the dreamlike quality of the story. Because as you move between like these small impressions of, wait, does she have a scorpion tattooed on her butt? To, wait, is she becoming the scorpion? Is she the scorpion? What's happening? What can really take place, and again, I'm going to have to use this word again, is a dream. The reader is effectively reading this odd, weird, discombobulating vision that they are occurring, and it, by the end of it, I'm going to be honest, I can't tell one way or the other what happened, and I don't really care, because it was still a really interesting effect. It was a really interesting story. It was a weird dream. And so one of the things that I love about this particular story, and in fact all about Pictures That Tick, is it's an opportunity to just dream. Far too often than not, and I guess I'm going to come full circle here, narrative in comics has traditionally been very much point A to point Z. You begin in point A and you end in point Z, because again, commercially speaking, that's what most people want. That's what's going to sell. Pictures That Tick is different, because not only is it just a series of interconnected stories, it's just a small little collection of daydreams, and we really underappreciate how important these weird little daydreams can be to the overall creative process, if not to the way that we encounter life itself. These little perceptions, much like seeing a woman picking up a scorpion in a restaurant and putting it in a box, or suddenly thinking that you see a scorpion tattoo on your wife's butt. Has that always been there? I don't think it is. I look at her butt often enough, I should know. But these little moments where reality is blurred can become really interesting opportunities for stories that even if they don't have a clear point A to point Z progress, it doesn't matter. The point is simply to just experience the dream and feel it and be it for a moment before sort of ending it and recognizing that even if it doesn't make clear crystal sense, it's still a beautiful dream nonetheless. Food for thought. Let's do the last hurrah and then call it a day. So, pictures that tick. I think I've said enough at this point, and if you're still watching, holy crap, good for you, man. I hope I'm cute. That's funny. That's funny. Anyway, Pictures That Tick is really interesting, and I'm saying that not just because I'm a Dave McKean fanboy. I will die on that hill. You can call me basic, call me whatever you want. I love Dave McKean because I love dreams. I love all form of dreams, not just the weird dreams that are just our neurons firing while we're in REM. REM is a band. No, wait, REM is a cycle and dream sleep. You know what? When we're asleep, we have dreams, and those dreams are interesting and weird, but just as important are the dreams that we have while we're awake, because those dreams are really the way that we try to create meaning and purpose in our life. It's the way that we try to interpret our reality. It's the way we try to process trauma. It's the way that we try to process misunderstandings or misconceptions or just the sheer oddity and at some point depressing monotony that is existence. Dreams, when they're sort of held for a moment or at least created on the page, like just about every single story in this collection is a wonderful opportunity to be reminded that comics can do great things. They can be dreams. They don't have to be moving from point A to point Z. They don't have to be melodramas. They can just be about exploring an idea, an emotion. They can just be about exploring a dream. And I recognize these stories are not going to be everybody's main deal. They're not going to be everybody's just main choice. Some people like stories that are clear and concise and focused. And hey, if that's you, do you, rock you, be you. I should be doing a Green Lantern video hopefully sometime in the near future. I'll see you then. But when we're talking about Pictures That Tick, I really want to convey to you that this is a book that is a nice reminder that comics can work when creators don't feel the effect to sort of bind into sort of just traditional commercial pressures. Pictures That Tick is art. Not just because it's an attempt to sort of do more than just draw characters having melodramatic events, what have you. It's also opportunities to just, like I said, dream. And that's why, over and over and over again, I will recommend Pictures That Tick. This book is beautiful. It's worth your time. Please, 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 if nothing else, take a chance. Disappear into a dream for a few hours. You won't regret it. All right, I'm going to call it a day there. Wow, thank you so much for watching. I meant for this to be just a 30-minute video, but it's Dave McKean. I always wind up just being a fanboy at this point. But hey, it helps the time pass by. So just a reminder, as always, please like, share, and subscribe, all that claptrap. It lets me know that you like these videos, that you want to see more. Maybe you just like laughing at me for a half hour. I honestly wouldn't blame you. Also, please don't forget, like I pointed at the very beginning, there is a Patreon now for my art and for this channel. $1 a month is all I ask. Seriously, that's it. There's no $5, $10, $25. It's $1 a month. If you want to give me $1 every month or even just a one-time donation of $1, I will thank you and I will appreciate you and I think you will be awesome. And I appreciate it. I'm saying appreciate it a lot. I think you're cool. Seriously, you're awesome. Pictures That Tick. Now, you'll note this is a Dark Horse comic. Dark Horse is, again, having some issues right now, at least in terms of this taping, what with the acquisition of 21st Century Fox by Disney and Alien and Star Wars effectively being pulled from their publishing line. Also, Pictures That Tick is long since out of print, so finding this book is probably going to be a struggle. You can try Dave McKean's website. I've posted a link to it in the description section below. You can also try your local comic book shop because, again, every shop is different. And sometimes retailers will have books like this just tucked into a back room that they'll put on the shelf one day. So ask your comic book shop, hey, do you have a copy of Pictures That Tick, or can you help me get a copy of Pictures That Tick? If they can't, try your local public library. If they don't have it in their collection, they can give you an interlibrary loan slip, and you can always check it out from another library. I believe that is it. Thank you for laughing at me for a half hour. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. Go read some comics.